Hey guys, what's up? Game Pizza Boy here, host of the Pizza Party. Welcome back to the channel. I hope we're doing fantastic today, guys. And I'm back for another Dead by Daylight video content drop right here, as something came up recently, and I wanted to kind of discuss this a little bit right here and kind of make a video on it and kind of give you guys my thoughts on it, and also discuss the recent kind of really big discussions that are heating up right now, of course, on social media when it regards this right now, because there are people who are really going very serious about this and concerned about if this does get released as a future chapter, that they think that this is just becoming less like what DBD is standing for and more like Fortnite. What I'm referring to is basically a recent interview between a French content creator by the name of Saw Pollen and, of course, Matthew Cote, and he answered quite a lot of questions. I won't go through the video because it's all in French translation, of course, but and it's a lot to cover, so I will just leave the video in the description below if you guys want to go look at it yourself. But the one key factor that I want to talk about is that he did confirm, apparently, in the video during the interview, is that there are talks between both a contact with over at Disney and Behavior to probably look into a possible collaboration between the two and maybe making a dedicated future Star Wars related drop of content, and maybe possibly a chapter that could lead to possibly maybe seeing someone like Darth Vader, one of the most very much popular, villains we all know and love throughout the Star Wars series, and as well as media itself and cinema, that might be added to DBD in the future. So with this announcement happening right there out of the blue, and this happening, it's led people a lot of speculation what to expect, of course. But I wanted to make this video more specifically about the concerns about this situation right here, and that's why I want to make this video right here, of course. I was going to plan to do like a video on going over my ideas and what I think I'd do. I've already covered this before on like a previous couple streams before, so I don't really think I need to cover in a video really seriously right now in this topic. But of course, if you want me to make like a full-blown video, definitely let me know in the comments below if you want me to make my own ideas of what I want to see in a Vader like Star Wars like chapter if it were to happen and exist. But my main focus is more specifically is that there are many people in the community that are concerned with the problem that it might lead into DBD possibly going full on Fortnite because of the introduction of Star Wars, because Star Wars isn't horror and stuff like that. And because of this, it's definitely something that is very concerning to me about the mindset people are thinking like this. And I really think I wanted to kind of discuss a little more right here. So that's what I want to focus on. That's my main focus I want to do in this video, and I want to just kind of get us. So, okay, let me go ahead and discuss this real quick about the situation right here, about what I've seen from comments. I don't really need to like show the tweets or show any videos in mine, because frankly, you can just go look at it yourself, of course, and social media is always going to have some kind of drama going on or some weird heat topics, but there are both sides of the situation. Some people agree that Vader shouldn't be included because he is definitely in his own way a terrifying killer in his own way. Others disagree because they're worried it might make the game DBD more like Fortnite, and possibly it's gonna be like too less horror and more of just throwing licenses back and forth. And I do understand some points, but let me go ahead and just give you my personal thoughts on this situation and discuss how I feel about this, where this is leading to, and how I usually see things this way personally, and why I can actually maybe vaguely agree with actually Vader being included in DBD, because I actually do support the side that wants Vader in Star Wars and DBD, because there are some very big points I follow by when it comes to a licensed chapter, and also seeing some more reasonable ideas that can come into mind and that counteracts a lot of people who disagree with it. But again, I'm always willing to discuss this with people who do not agree with, so if you want to discuss this, feel free. But I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on the situation, because again, I hear a lot of this and I think it's all understandable and what they're coming from, but I think there's some things that people I think are just taking a little bit maybe too much, just getting a little bit worried about the situation right there. And again, another thing that I'll just say again is that it's not confirmed literally by Matthew Cote. This is not confirmed that it's going to happen, because if this is just simply just contacts between them and Disney, then there's nothing to worry about, because it doesn't mean there's a chapter, at least not yet. That just means that they're just working out on something, and who knows. So let's just wait and see, and we'll hear the information. But here's my discussion on the situation. I'll hear from both sides right here. So I'll start off first is with the people who I agree with the people who do not want Vader in DBD, and then I'll get to my actual big points of why I actually do not agree with these people and why I can see Vader coming to DBD, and actually talk about the situation. Alright, so now I will say this, that for the people who are like concerned about the future of DBD when it comes to these chapters, I can very much agree, though. Now, DBD, as we know, is an asymmetrical horror game. It is featuring everything when it comes to the concept of horror. We've had Halloween, we've had Nightmare on Elm Street, Saw, we've had Ghostface introduced separately from the Scream series right there, Ash vs. Evil Dead, Alan Wake, all these different chapters right here. But even though many of them, the majority of them have been horror, not all of them are horror, but I'll get to that when I get to my defense for the inclusion of Vader. But again, though, many of them have every right to be understandably upset by the concern about maybe possibly Star Wars being included in DBD and why they feel like it might be a little bit too much like Fortnite, because DBD is a horror game in its own way. It needs to feature a library of horror franchises, so it's important that they keep on not only making their own original concepts of horror like they've done lately for a while, and we're hoping they'll keep adding more of the original concept, but also with many different popular licenses. For example, Halloween. It's one of the first ever licensed chapters that was released for DBD very much long back before when it came out back on October of 2016. It was a big launch right there to get started and kick things off with DBD, and it was one of the most biggest franchises you could possibly mention when it comes to an iconic horror franchise like, you know, just Halloween. It's a big popular like movie series. It's really one of the classics. Featured The Shape, Michael Myers, include Laurie Strode, include, of course, Haddonfield as a map. It was one of the most biggest, exciting franchises. And when that got released, it started setting point for the future for DBD and hopes to release even more licenses down the line. And they all have one thing in common. They are horror series. Many of them are all horror series. They come from a line of basically meant to be scary, terrifying, and represents something that's more gruesome and very much strange of the unknown. And that's why a lot of people are, of course, concerned with Vader being included in Dead by Daylight, because a Star Wars franchise is like that is not really horror. It's mostly just a very action-packed big story about wars and battles and many mystical stuff like Jedi, Sith, and bounty hunters and all that stuff. But even though I love the franchise, I can understand where they're coming from. After all, something like this is a concern for DBD, because Fortnite has been in a very big deal right there as they relate to, because it's been getting tons of content across like a multiverse, a plethora of things, and we've seen many franchises being included and many people, not just horror but other action-packed related stuff, just get included into Fortnite. And because of that, people are concerned that if, with all the Star Wars content being released in Fortnite and then DBD is now looking into some of the mix, they're concerned that it's going to break the flow and kind of saturate a little bit of the game because of the inclusion of some that's not really a horror franchise, and thus it's going to ruin the flow of what the game is right there. And that, of course, is pretty much where my defense for the people, obviously, for this, concern is. Obviously, I can understand the point where they're coming from, and it is definitely very concerning for sure. I can understand completely. I mean, it is definitely not a horror franchise, and I do not want them to like keep adding like licenses that don't make sense. And obviously, I agree. I think there needs to be some that has to make sense, and horror is where it's at, and obviously, it should be the focus of that. And I hope for the best they don't mess it up and they get it down right and they understand the situation right here for sure, and try not to just include any other license just because of people requesting or something like that. But that's where, of course, I drop now my defense against those who are doing that, because unfortunately I have to very much wholeheartedly disagree with that point, because, well, yes, it is a horror franchise and it involves many different horror related properties right there. DBD, though, has shown itself time and time again throughout the surveys, which, even though you should take it very seriously since it's not always completely going to be confirmed that everything is going to be on the works, they still include quite a lot of interesting licensed topics anyway that do not make sense at all. And there's already a couple of chapters we've already got, both mini and big, a lot right there anyway, that literally not really horror, and they already are, like, in their own ways, just something and really unique to them in many different aspects that just fits DBD, that doesn't have to be horror. And because of this, I would like to at least make out my points about the situation right there and discuss where I see fitting when I see a license, and how can I say it should be included into a chapter and become a licensed chapter for DBD. So let me explain my three main points and give you guys my thoughts on this. And I'll leave this to you guys, what you want to believe or not, but these are my points as I discussed many times. So the 3 points I follow by, I usually relate these 3 different categories in mind, and these points are basically, as long as one of them are met, then I think it can become a licensed chapter for DBD. So I follow like this. Number one, does the game or the series in general, the series in conclusion, fit as a horror franchise into DBD? Is it a horror franchise? Number two, does the franchise itself have very highly big definitions of killers, survivors, and places that would be fitting as realms that represent true big memories for said characters that they have dealt with in their world? Since obviously, as we know in the lore, the realms are taken and by the memories of those that were brought in the realm by the entity and formed by the entity's twisted ways, basically, in order for them to do the trials. And finally, does the lore and many aspects of the story within the franchise fit into the lore DBD in some way of how the entity could intervene? Can the entity intervene in some way? How will that play out? And of course, would the entity be inconsiderate of the situation right there when interfering with the realm completely? Now, obviously, horror is where it's at, of course, which I'll just mention right there. Obviously, many of the franchises we've seen already are horror right there. But I want to bring this point as a way to defend this point, because I also feel like that there has been some incidents before where people have been using that and concerned of some points, and especially when I get to my second point in certain situations on where I was going. Obviously, many both original and licensed chapters have shown time and time again that they are, of course, horror in many different ways. There is still definitely been some topics and situations that have resulted in basically a big backlash on people going against each other because they said that this is definitely not a good choice of a chapter for many different reasons. Let me start with first Tokyo Ghoul chapter, because this one has been a very big hot topic before when it was released, that a lot of people were just fighting about this on social media and trying to talk smack about the release of chapter, thinking it's just not horror, and people were just treating it pretty poorly on its upcoming announcement and release. And that's just unfortunately sad about the situation, right? Because why would you want to treat something like this pretty poorly just because the fact that it wasn't what you want and it's an anime chapter and stuff like that, being the first one, of course, and why it was so harsh to people wanting to treat it poorly just because of its release. But in my defense, even though I'm not a big anime fan a lot, I do have to say, though, it is literally fitting to DBD, because not only that, one, if you actually research Tokyo Ghoul and look at the manga, you see the story of how very brutal it is for Kaneki, and of course, not only that, how very vile he's been dealing with when, of course, he became a ghoul, and what he's dealt with throughout his time. And the many brutal deaths and disgusting things that have been shown off time and time again throughout the story, it is very obvious how very serious it is and how horrifying it is. So it definitely already fits the horror aspect anyway. And of course, because of this, it's also become a very big problem where I hear people trying to like go against that reason and for like how it is like to them, like that it is horror, but they just don't like it. They just don't, it's not what they want. It's become apparent that it's just not what they really wanted, but they just use the excuse that it's just not horror, basically. It's just not right to me, the fact that people have to treat it pretty poorly just because it's not what they wanted. And so, because it just looks less like the horror they exactly wanted compared to other horror franchises like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and all that stuff, it just doesn't meet their mark. And so they treat it pretty poorly. But it is horror. It really is. It may not be the type of horror you're expecting. It's the type of horror that the anime and manga style follows by, but it's still horror nevertheless. It may not be to your liking. It may not be what you like a lot, but it does eventually still, narratively still fits. And it fits in all points. It's scary. It's terrifying. Kaneki does fit the role of a killer because, again, he had to suffer through his situation becoming a ghoul and controlling his bloodlust hunger, basically. And the entity took him just at a good time when he was obviously in his most weakness at the time. So once taken, it was just an easy fit for him. And now Kaneki is now basically forced to now basically continue his bloodlust hunger with no one of his friends in sight to help him out fight off the urge. And now he's basically now being tripped by the entity to continue that lust. But then let me also bring my point also stuff like Nicolas Cage, Tomb Raider, and even Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so these franchises, of course, are not horror, but yet they still contain horror aspects in their own lives, basically, in some way. And also, even if they're not horror aesthetic, that doesn't mean they can't still fit into DBD in some ways. Nicolas Cage has some assets that he already fits very well into this role, because he's also played in many different movies and shows, both in some ways terrifying sometimes and horrific. So he already has experience in some horror stuff anyway, so he does have his own role for that. Tomb Raider, while it's not a horror franchise, has had many terrifying moments that Lara Croft has explored throughout her time I'm exploring the many different tombs and dungeons and all that relates crazy stuff that she had to explore throughout the lore. So she's had her experience of most terrifying stuff for sure, and she has survived many things. So she pretty much already fits the role in the DBD because of that very much. She may not be a horror franchise, but she's definitely part of something that is literally part of some scarier events she's explored. And Dungeons & Dragons, while also not a very horrific franchise, it also still, once again, has terrifying tales that can be told by you and your friends when making your D&D sessions throughout the realm. And not to mention, Vecna is literally like the embodiment of the dead. Like, he's like a warlock that summons the dead, has a very nasty, dangerous, powerful, magical spell book that literally can just summon the dead, can use dark magic spells and necromancy, and even not to mention the fact that it's very powerful, as we know from the lore, basically. So it's literally a book of unknown proportions, and that's exactly what the Lich wants to use it for, to take over, to bring those into his knees or join the army of the dead he summons. It's literally a terrifying sight to think of, even in the case of not a horror franchise. So why does it matter now because of Darth Vader being talked about? Because Star Wars is not a horror franchise, and yet somehow still there is terrifying moments about Darth Vader. Just because it's not horror does not mean we can't just include things that are not have horror aesthetically moments in their lives, in their stories, and what they've been told through what we've seen. Vader is literally the embodiment of a villain and a killer because he's done so much. He turned to the dark side and became Darth Vader. He slayed many of the Jedi and caused the Great Purge that resulted in Order 66. He eventually became this monstrous robotic form of himself, basically, to survive, knowing that he lost most of his midichlorian count, and so he's not at his full potential anymore, but he still shows his power and his strength. He's hunted down Jedi, he's killed innocents, he's killed the many rebel soldiers in his fight to defend the Empire and for his master, Emperor Palpatine. He's done so much horrific stuff, up until the point where he finally turned to the light side at the hands of his own son right there and returned the Jedi. It's literally, it shows how much he's been through, but nevertheless, looking back on it, you can also think about that if Vader was alive after Return of the Jedi, the rebellion would not condone him being alive and probably would want him gone because of what he's caused. No matter how much, if Luke was still there to help his father, if he knew that the good in him is back, he still, what he did was wrong. And again, if we look at this perspective right here, don't forget that the entity wants to take survivors and killers to feed off their emotions, because that's what it does. And he needs some of the best that could be emotional in many different ways. And that's what fits very well with Vader, because Vader is a Sith. Sith use their emotions completely. They let all their emotions out. They don't try to control them. They let it go, and they let it do it. So they do not care. This is something I think the entity would want to have in its realm. Someone like Vader with the entity would actually fit very well defeating him and would easily get off its emotions. And the kind of emotions that could be tricked on survivors, especially in the presence of the Sith Lord known as Darth Vader, would fit that narrative and role to the goal of the entity. Does it really matter about it not being a horror franchise when also the purpose of licenses can also be released, not just because they're just horror, but also because they're also horror aesthetic? They already have horror assets in many different ways. They have terrifying goals. Just because it's not a horror series does not mean it can't be included into DBD, because DBD can still include many different horrific things. But also, there's many things they've already included like skins and stuff like that, that don't make sense, that don't fit many narratives. Another example I want to mention by this, for example, is Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher series. This may be just a costume collection, but it's still not a horror franchise. It's still a franchise that just takes place in mystical and many magical medieval kind of world, basically. I mean, I've been recently starting Witcher with The Witcher 3, but I even understand this aesthetic. It's not horror, so there's not always terrifying things all the time, like to the horror aesthetic, but it still has some terrifying moments in the story it's being told, and many grotesque and vile creatures imaginable and people you encounter throughout the Witcher series. So why would that still be included as a costume collection? Not to mention the fact that Geralt of Rivia is a Witcher who is very powerful to sense monsters, to hunt down, has unique powers and stuff like that. But when he gets brought into the realm, he's powerless. He loses his powers. So how is that fair for someone as powerful as Geralt of Rivia from a universe that's not horror related, but is also, and not only that, he's also a hunter in his own right, but now he is become the hunted. Again, the narrative can still fit in many different ways, showing off that DBD can still fit many licenses if it wants to, as long as it makes sense, which my 3 points, which as my first point mentioned about if it's horror related, it can also mean horror aesthetic. So for someone like a Geralt of Rivia, he already comes from a world that dealt with many horrific things in its own way. So it already purposely goes down that path already. So someone like the Entity probably would want Geralt of Rivia because he demonstrates emotion, he demonstrates the tough fights he dealt with before, which is why the classic collection and the costumes have been made for a reason. So that's the point where I mentioned right there with Star Wars. How is it any different to not want to include Star Wars just because it's not a horror series, but yet still has someone as terrifying as Darth Vader that could be a killer in his own way? That is the reason why number one, as I say about the horror series, is why I feel like it's become misguided too much by a lot of people, in my opinion, because they think that just because that we're playing a horror game, that we can't just include anything that's just horror aesthetic. Instead, we need defining horror series. Well, yes, I will say this, though, that I can agree with that point right there, as there are still plenty of horror series that we've yet to see. Like, my most big top 3 licenses I want to see are like The Thing, Dead Space, and Outlast. But nevertheless, though, it's proven time and time again that we can still include anything that's horror, just not a horror series. It can be horror asset, horror theme in some ways, or at least has something that was terrifying in their stories that have been told or their gameplay, even if it's not horror related. There are many possibilities, which is where I beat number 1 on a lot of people, in my opinion, when it comes to that. Now to number 2 right now. Number 2, does the franchise include any aspects of killers, survivors, and do the realms represent those characters as memories that could really fit in a way that is very impactful to be a realm in the Entity? Obviously, many of the world chapters we've seen so far being released has many different realms, stuff like that as possible. Not every one of them did get it, but there are plenty of them. Probably, for example, the first Resident Evil chapter. When that released, it included, of course, Jill, Leon, Nemesis, and RPD from Raccoon City. Obviously, this is very impactful in its own way that fits the second point. Not because of it, just also because it's horror, but it already has assets of them that make sense. Jill and Leon are prime examples of the survivors. They are prime examples of it because they have shown their time and time again they have survived through and through the most dangerous and vile moments completely. They have shown time and time again that they can easily take on many different stuff like that. And because of that, they definitely will be brought into the realm of the Entity because they are survivors. The Entity would want that, because they want someone like Jill and Leon who have proven themselves they could survive very easily. Same thing for legendary skins like Chris and Claire Redfield. Nemesis, for example, is a prime example of a killer. He is shown time and time again as a bioweapon, hunting down STARS members and hunting anyone on their side that gets in their way, that he will stop at nothing to cause chaos, death, and destruction to complete its goals. And that's why Nemesis is impactful as a killer. He already proves time and time again, as we see in Resident Evil 3, and it still shows that very much for sure. And RPD is a prime example of that too, as well as a good example of map. It's a memory to represent as a symbol of RPD that we see in RE2 and even RE3 as well. It represents a location that was very impactful throughout the exploration as a very big center point. That's why the Entity brought RPD into the realm, because from the memories of Nemesis, from the memories of Jill and Leon, from these guys, the memories that those two impacted when they both have visited, both Leon and Jill especially, is the reason why they eventually have to relive this whole nightmare over and over again. And there are many examples too I can mention this that are still impactful in many different ways in the second point. Ghostface, despite being only just the mask and stuff like that, makes sense. He's the embodiment of a killer, hunting down its targets, stalking its prey and stuff like that. Stranger Things is also a prime example of this. Steve and Nancy have survived so much stuff dealing with this with the Upside Down throughout the series. And again, the Demogorgon is a prime hunter and killer in its own way, an animal that hunts its prey. And Hawkins plays very role, being the place where the experiments go, a memory that's impactful to everything that led into the Upside Down being revealed. So as I demonstrate everything here, as I explain this, as long as each of these important parts are played for the survivor, the killer, and the location, if they all are included into one or either are separated. So why can't something like a Star Wars chapter be included? Because again, there is aspects of it that they all matter. Like I said about Vader, I've already repeated it again, of course, with him being definitely an example of a killer. But also for survivors can work too as well. There are many characters in the Star Wars universe that have proven themselves being true survivors, fighting off the many different threats both as Jedi or just regular people and soldiers. We've seen this time and time again, even in the original trilogy with characters like Luke, Han, Leia, Lando, Chewie, and many other characters along the way who have proven time and time again. So why does something like this not work for Star Wars when already something like this for many different survivors as well too fit this well? There are also many places as well in the Star Wars universe like Tatooine, Bespin, the Death Star, Endor, that play a very significant role in the memories of these characters that have significantly played in their fight for survival. Why does it not work here for that second point too as well with Star Wars? Because it's not horror? Because it doesn't meet the points of DBD? Because it's too much like Fortnite? Fortnite isn't the only thing that involves killing people and literally trying to make sure you stay on top of everyone else. Literally, a DBD does the exact same thing. Sure, from a horror aspect, but just because it's not horror from a series does not mean it can't be fitting that way too. They already play their roles. Vader and many aspects of the characters that could be survivors, killers, and the worlds that explore in the Star Wars universe already fit that narrative right there. So why is it any different now just because of one reason right there? That's the reason why I put it my second point. That's why it already meets that point. And you don't have to believe me. You can just literally look at, again, Nicolas Cage, Tomb Raider, and even also Dungeons and Dragons again right there. Three of those franchises are all not horror related, as again Nicolas Cage is just the actor, Tomb Raider is not a horror franchise, and Dungeons and Dragons is not a horror franchise, but yet they already meet their goals. Nicolas Cage is an actor who's been through many of his own movies and shows and proved his skills in his acting. Same thing with Tomb Raider. Lara Croft is not from a horror franchise, but she's a survivor. So that's literally a great example of literally someone that could be included in the DBD. She survived it all. And Vecna, the Lich, is a true example of a killer too. He's not from a horror franchise because, again, there are horror aspects in the Dungeons & Dragons universe, but it's not horror related, it's just medieval and mystical. So what makes a difference here now with Star Wars? Not to mention, it's not the first time now that we've seen Star Wars head decapitation, severed hands, and the deaths of many people, including children, for God's sakes. Don't forget Anakin killed younglings, for God's sakes. So what does make a difference here now just because it's not horror? Now for the final and third main part right there. Does the lore of, for example, Star Wars fit in the narrative lore of DBD in the context of the entity? The entity, usually as we know, takes people from the realms and takes them into the trials. And obviously we know this might change the story and time point of what we see in the lore, but nevertheless, there are some moments in Star Wars that could be fitting as well too. I won't name every single one, of course, right there, but some prime examples I can imagine are like, for example, obviously the many different moments that were happening during the battles of, like, you know, like during Hoth, Luke could have been taken and Han could be taken when they were out on Hoth when he was stuck after the attack on the Wampa. Vader could have been taken just when he was dealing with on Malachor with Ahsoka and fell down from the crack with the activated destructive weapon of the Sith Temple right there. There are many moments where people have died or could have been close to death, and the entity could just take them and just make it seem like that, oh, they just died or something like that, or something happened to them, which would leave mystery for the characters in the universe. But the entity is most pleased enough that they just take it very well. So it already meets that goal too as well. Many of the characters in many of the licenses have been taken for these many different reasons. With the Finest of Freddy's chapter coming up right now, Springtrap was taken just after he was springlocked, and so it changes everything for FNAF 3, but again, it was a perfect time because no one knows where he is, and he was still in the back room area right there of the FNAF 3 location for Fazbear's Fright soon. Chucky was taken by an entity through a fog when he was thought that Andy ran through the fog. Wesker was taken during his time before Resident Evil 5, experimenting with Ouroboros in his little security little area right there, and was basically studying Ouroboros on himself and everything else until eventually the entity took him while he was busy. No one else would have suspected that completely before he could put his plan into action at all. So again, why wouldn't it fit very well for someone like Vader too as well, for the lore aspect too as well? The lore would probably not be any problem whatsoever. the lore would be very not only much fitting, but it would also have a good way to kind of explain very well in some way too. Not to mention, you could also theorize possibilities of what would happen with Vader's interference no longer being projected in its universe and now in the realm of the entity, and what would this affect with like Palpatine and all the other characters that do not see him anymore. That's the point, basically, what I mean by this. Again, the lore would not be changed, let alone would it affect anything for DBD either, because, again, the lore of DBD still stands right there as it does with many killer survivors being brought into the realm. They get taken, and now they're forced to basically kill or survive in their goals. And they are taken at certain points because the entity deems them as viable, good picks for the realm to feed on their emotions. Okay, well, with all my topics to talk about, let me go ahead and just say one final thing again, though, that, like I said, DBD has not confirmed yet that Vader or Star Wars is going to be added at all into Dead by Daylight as a chapter. It's just contacts with Disney and probably some workarounds. And this probably happens with any license no matter what. So, again, do I think this is going to happen? No. I don't know it. You don't know it. None of us know it. Only time will tell. Is it a big deal, in my opinion, that if it doesn't get added? Not really. Again, there are many franchises that I want, and many people want. So even if Star Wars, something I am a huge fan of, weren't getting added in something like that, I don't care. It's all in good fun in the end, though. It's all fun indeed. But again, the fact that people who say that Star Wars shouldn't be added, it's making DBD too much like Fortnite, and sporadically going crazy about the whole multiverse thing just because it's not horror related, is very unfortunate and sad to hear that mindset right there, because again, yes, DBD is a horror franchise in its own way. It is horror related completely through and through, but just because that it's not horror, but it still has definitions of survivors and killers and has horror aspects of them, and not only that, still like has moments that could fit into the lore of both DBD and their universes that they pull in themselves into. It doesn't really matter if it is horror. It's fine. And not to mention, it's not the first time that people have complained about certain chapters releasing that they are not horror related. That's why I just wanted to make this video. I just feel that people complain about this is just not really making this any better and are not handling this very well either. And I think as we keep progressing further and further, it proves time and time again that the people who make these kind of excuses and keep repeating this kind of stuff are not someone I can really say we should listen to, nor should we trust in that matter, because, well, yes, I understand the point about the horror-related aspects that needs to be focused on because it's a horror game. We have learned time and time again that they even treat certain things that even are horror, like Tokyo Ghoul, not like horror because they don't like it. Star Wars is not horror, but there are a lot of people who do love it. Many fans. And Vader would honestly be the most fitting killer imaginable. And while I would say that it would be interesting to see what it would be like if survivors were brought into the matter and see someone like Luke, Leia, or Han have to survive and then get themselves brutally kill, stuff like that, again, that wouldn't be nothing new to me because, again, there have been many aspects we've seen already of leading characters in Star Wars who've been brutally killed in many different ways. And while we don't see it all the time on screen constantly, and even also how very careful sometimes Star Wars is about showing those brutal moments, they still happen. And there have been many things that have been so terrifying to see what happens. So that's just why I just think that why would it be any big deal including Vader, who's done a lot of terrible things anyway, into Dead by Daylight? Why wouldn't it be so bad for that reason? Why? So that's where my point stands right there. But again, nevertheless, I understand what people are coming from, and I'm not too worried if Vader era in Star Wars were not to be added at all into DBD. Doesn't bug me. There are other franchises I do want to see in the future, and in the end, though, I'm pretty chill very much whatever happens, because as long as it at least makes sense for those points, like I said, then that's all fine and dandy by me. So only time will tell. We'll see where this progresses. But nevertheless, I'm still hopeful and excited for the future. I think it definitely is pretty exciting if it does happen, and if it doesn't, oh well. I'm cool with it, and I think I'll live fine without it, even if a chapter doesn't happen. If you have any interest, or if you feel like you have criticism on the situation, definitely let me know. I would love to talk about it for sure. And as always, if you found this video helpful and fun, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to show your support to the Pizza Party, and make sure to go check me out on my multi-link down below in the description if you guys want to check out everything else that goes on the Pizza Party. Check me out when I go live on Twitch, Kick, YouTube. Come check out my Discord server, follow me on social medias, etc., whatever. And I hope to see you guys there, of course, anytime at the Pizza Party. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Take care, and peace.